In about 1 week, Oppenheimer releases on 4K and physical media, and while I will be doing an extended video on the 3 hours of behind the scenes footage we get with that, just a couple of days ago, director Christopher Nolan did an interview with Variety on the process of getting his film made. On top of this, he talked about some other interesting details, whether it be teaming up with Universal to bring this movie to life, the thematic importance of this story, and the effect it had on him, the potential for working with Warner Brothers again in the future, and a few comments on his next film. So in this video, I'm going to be detailing what was said by the director in that Variety interview, and hopefully it acts as a nice build-up for the 4K release of the film next week. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my future content surrounding Oppenheimer and Christopher Nolan's future projects, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. But without further ado, let's dive into the new discussion with director Christopher Nolan on Oppenheimer. So the interview that Variety posted in an article last week had Christopher Nolan discussing Oppenheimer at length, and particularly his reaction to the success of the film in theatres this summer. I will post a link in the description to that article if you want to read it fully yourself, and I'll show some new behind the scenes images on screen to complement this video too. Variety began the article by reminding us that a 3-hour R-rated drama focusing on discussions in laboratories and congressional hearings was able to make nearly $950 million globally, more than almost any recent Marvel film or blockbuster release. They say that it somewhat reshapes Hollywood's idea of what constitutes blockbuster entertainment, and it shows us that audiences will turn out for darker, more complex stories if they're told with the scale that Nolan has mastered in many films over many years. And they say that it's only giving other filmmakers hope, with one of them also being quoted in this particular interview. Damien Chazelle was that filmmaker, and he said, "Not only did Oppenheimer work, but it seemed to work in defiance of received wisdom. Before I even saw the film, it felt like one of those test case scenarios." All around the industry, a lot of people were saying, this is not what the audience wants, it's a bummer, and they just want escapism. And they were all wrong, so that makes its success all the sweeter. And from this, they began to move into the conversation with the director himself and his producing partner Emma Thomas, mentioning how stunned they were by the reaction to the film. Nolan said, "With certain films, your timing is just right in ways that you could never have predicted. When you start making a film, you're 2 or 3 years out from when it's going to be released, so you're trying to hit a moving target as far as the interest of the audience. But sometimes you catch a wave and the story you're telling is one that people are waiting for. It's clear from the box office that audiences are looking for things they haven't seen before. We've been through a period where it was wonderfully reassuring for studio executives to feel that their franchise properties could go on forever and be predictably successful. But you can't deny the filmgoer's desire for novelty." Emma Thomas then talked about seeing that reaction firsthand, being alongside Nolan's mother and their 3 children in an IMAX theatre, seeing a sold-out crowd react to the Trinity test scene. Emma said, "I usually don't want to go, but the minute I'm there, something magic happens. This film has impacted people and made them think very deeply about all the ways in which we can be our own worst enemy." And Nolan himself said to that, "It was a remarkable experience to be there. Every seat was filled, and the focus on what was happening on screen was so strong. That level of engagement was something that I'd never really felt before. Real attention was being paid." Variety then transitions their discussion into the birth of the idea for Oppenheimer, and also Nolan's process of taking ideas for a project he feels a connection to, even if that project doesn't see the light. Emma Thomas firstly said on Nolan, his office is a shambles. It's filled with notebooks, there's no method to them, there are sketches of things or a logo for a movie he's going to make, or a little bit of a story he may want to tell. He writes everything down. Variety highlights the director doesn't start writing the script until he knows he's actually going to make the movie he sees in his head. And that's partly because of his past experience with writing a biopic about Howard Hughes, which was expected to star Jim Carrey as Hughes, but later was abandoned due to Martin Scorsese's The Aviator going into production. And that gave him some inspiration with Oppenheimer, to write and direct another biopic that would stylistically tell a story through both a subjective and objective lens. Nolan said, "It was very emotional to not get to make something I'd poured all that into. The idea for Oppenheimer was then born and developed after Robert Pattinson gave me a book of his speeches at the wrap party for Tenet. It was essentially a brilliant mind asking how we manage this change we've wrought." This then escalated when Nolan's longtime producer Charles Roven suggested he should read American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin, a book that I myself spent this year reading too, and if you've read it, you'd understand why Nolan's fascination with the man and fears over nuclear annihilation grew even deeper. He said, "This was a man who was a remarkable combination of integrity, sincerity and theatricality. I'm drawn to complex and contradictory protagonists." The article even makes note of how one image in the film grew in Nolan's mind before filming, and how it became one of the most impactful images in the whole project. They mention how on a stormy day in LA, Nolan was returning home when he noticed raindrops falling on a puddle. It inspired the beginning of Oppenheimer, where it becomes a moment of contemplation for a brilliant mind who will become painfully aware of humanity's boundless potential to build as well as destroy. Nolan said, "As I looked at it, I had a distinctly negative reaction. That gave me the faith that the film was working on me, and it made me glad to eventually leave it behind, which I haven't felt with my other films. I was ready to think about other things." The rest of the article focused primarily on Nolan's relationship with working with Universal for the first time, the support they gave him, and some details on whether he would work with Warner Brothers again after the studio put a focus on their HBO Max model during the pandemic. Nolan came out and criticised the studio on that business model at the time, and it turned out that he was right, and the shift towards streaming damaged their reputation when it came to the theatrical. Starting with the details on working with Universal, it was mentioned that he had established a strong relationship with its head, Donna Langley, after previously working on a film adaptation of the TV series The Prisoner, which never came to fruition. They apparently stayed in touch, and Nolan appreciated Donna's reputation for protecting and supporting top talent. The producer said that a biopic at this length about this subject matter should not do well, but when you factor in a filmmaker like Chris, who is undeniably theatrical and who has a strong following of fans ranging from teenagers to adults, that's the differentiator. He wants to immerse viewers in the world of his protagonist, so he shot the film on location in New Mexico, near where Oppenheimer's team made the bomb, as well as in Princeton and Berkeley, where he spent most of his academic career. The production used historical locations, filming scenes in the actual Los Alamos home where Oppenheimer lived with his wife and young children as he oversaw the Manhattan Project. Nolan's film depicts the Trinity test, the first detonation of the bomb in the New Mexico desert, in nail-biting detail. And when it comes to the recent disputes surrounding how the filmmaker tackled something like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was clear that this was done with intention. Nolan said, "The film presents Oppenheimer's experience subjectively. correctly. It was always my intention to rigidly stick to that. Oppenheimer heard about the bombing at the same time that the rest of the world did. I wanted to show somebody who is starting to gain a clearer picture of the unintended consequences of his actions. It was as much about what I don't show as what I show. Nolan says that he and the movie he made are more interested in provoking discussion than providing resolution, and the film is an honest attempt to express his feelings about it. And when it comes to what was said about Warner Brothers, Nolan further made it clear that he now appreciates the new heads at the studio and gave a clear answer on working with them again in the future. He said, "It's water under the bridge. I'm absolutely open to working with them again. Pam and Mike and Zaslav, they're trying to do some great things with that studio, which is encouraging to see." He also added a bit on the whole streaming debate, saying, "Part of the craziness with the labour negotiations this summer has been the studio sitting there and going, well, we can't pay you because we don't have enough money." To which the answer is, well, you don't have enough money because you're not managing your business correctly. You're not getting the same amount of money for your product that you were before. The shift to streaming has disrupted the entire industry and created problems for everybody. Finally, when it comes to what the director said about his next movie, of course, at this point in time, he wouldn't give a lot away about what he's making, but he did slightly tease the process in bringing a new idea to the big screen. Variety asked him on whether he'd return to franchise filmmaking or whether he'd prefer making another original film, and he leaves the door quite open for both. He said, "Ideas come from everywhere. I've done a remake, I've made adaptations from comic books and novels, and I've written original screenplays. I'm open to anything, but as a writer and director, whatever I do, I have to feel like I own it completely. I have to make it original to me. The initial seed of an idea may come from elsewhere, but it has to go through my fingers on a keyboard and come out through my eyes alone." And this is exactly what I was saying in my video before, predicting the types of projects he could do next, saying that whatever it is, he will put the Nolan stamp on it. So while I don't currently think he will do a James Bond film, if it turns out that he is doing that, for instance, he would need room to make it his own and put his stamp on it. Perhaps that's why projects like Oppenheimer give him that added freedom to do something more creative with timelines, visual aesthetics, and the storytelling itself. But again, like he said, ideas come from everywhere, and he will keep making movies that are influenced by his style of filmmaking. We'll have to see what he does do next, and now that all the strikes have ended, things can only progress surrounding whatever idea he takes on. But that was my video breaking down the new details shared by Christopher Nolan surrounding the making of his latest film Oppenheimer. It'll be interesting to see the 3 hours of behind the scenes footage on the physical media release next week, and as I said at the start of this video, I will be discussing all the intriguing details shared in those featurettes. It was fascinating to hear Nolan talk about the process of making the film in this interview though too, and it does make me wonder what studio he will reside with when it comes to his next project. I personally think he'll stay at Universal for a few years after the success of Oppenheimer, and maybe sometime in the future we'll see him return to Warner Brothers now that bridges appear to have been rebuilt between them. I guess it depends on what project he makes next, and now that the SAG strike is over, hopefully we'll get some updates on that in the near future too. But what did you think of the details surrounding Nolan's new interview with Variety, and like me, are you looking forward to the behind the scenes featurettes on the 4K and Blu-ray coming out next week? Let me know down below in the comment section. For much more videos and updates on the work of Christopher Nolan, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like, rating, and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.